Be me, 52, finally ready to share what really happened. Sitting in my empty apartment on a Tuesday evening. Been thinking about this for months now. Need to get this out somewhere because literally nobody will listen to me anymore. Let me start from the beginning. Married Robert when I was 24. Thought he was different from other men. He was gentle, quiet, worked with his hands, owned a small auto repair shop, nothing fancy but honest work. Back then I thought that was refreshing. Thought I could help him grow, reach his potential. Fast forward through having our 3 boys. Peter in 96, Derek in 98, Joel in 2001. Beautiful children, smart as whips. But watching Robert interact with them started to bother me. All that rough housing, teaching them about cars and tools. I could see the patterns forming early. Started speaking up more around the house. Would interrupt when Robert was telling the boys some story about his day at the shop. Boys, remember that there are many different kinds of intelligence. Your father's work is important, but don't let anyone tell you that's the only path. Robert would just get this look on his face and change the subject. Dinner conversations became my opportunity to really educate them. Robert would try to ask the boys about school, sports, normal father stuff. I'd redirect, Peter, tell us about that book we read on gender roles in society. Or, Derek, what did you think about our conversation on systemic inequality? The boys would look uncomfortable, but I knew this was important foundation work. Robert started getting defensive about everything. Can't I just ask my son about his baseball game without it becoming a lecture? He'd say this right in front of the children, so I'd have to explain patiently that sports culture often reinforces harmful masculine stereotypes, that competitive hierarchies teach boys that dominance equals worth. Basic stuff, really, but he couldn't see it. Money became a constant source of tension. His little shop brought in maybe $45K a year, sometimes less. I had to make all the real financial decisions because he just didn't think strategically. Would want to waste money on tools he needed or some vacation to a lake. Meanwhile, I'm trying to save for the boys' futures, buy educational materials, pay for enrichment activities. Told him countless times that I wasn't trying to control anything, just trying to be responsible about our family's resources. But he'd get sulky when I'd use our savings for something important like Peter's debate camp, or when I bought that documentary series about the history of oppression. We can't afford this right now, Sarah. Like he didn't understand that investing in our children's consciousness was more important than whatever car part he wanted. The worst part was watching him try to undermine my parenting. I'd be explaining to Joel why certain toys reinforce violent tendencies, and Robert would literally roll his eyes where the boy could see. Or I'd be having a teaching moment about how traditional family structures harm everyone, and he'd interrupt with, Sarah, he's 8 years old. As if age was an excuse for ignorance. Intimacy became impossible. How could I be close to someone who fought me on everything I was trying to build? Every time he'd approach me, I'd think about how he'd contradicted me in front of Peter that morning, or how he'd dismissed my concerns about Derek's aggressive play fighting. I needed a partner who understood what we were working toward, not someone who sabotaged it. Started being more direct about the housework situation. I was doing emotional labor constantly, planning, teaching, guiding these children toward enlightenment. The least he could do was handle the physical maintenance of our home. But he'd complain, I work 10 hours a day and come home to more work. Couldn't see that my work was never ending. That, deprogramming 3 boys from toxic societal messages, was exhausting. His appearance started bothering me too. Gained weight, stopped caring about how he presented himself. Would show up to school events in his work clothes, grease under his fingernails. I'd try to suggest better options. Robert, this is Peter's academic awards ceremony. But he'd get defensive. What's wrong with how I look? Couldn't understand that he was representing our family, representing what we stood for. Around the time Joel turned 12, things got really bad. Robert started openly challenging me in front of all 3 boys. I'd be explaining something important, maybe how traditional masculinity hurts men too. And he'd say something like, Sarah, enough, right there at the dinner table, undermining years of careful education. The boys started taking his side more often, would get quiet when I tried to have real conversations. Peter actually said to me once, "Mom, can we just eat without talking about this stuff?" Broke my heart because I could see Robert's influence taking hold, all that toxic conditioning seeping back in. Tried couples therapy, but Robert wasn't really committed. Would sit there saying things like, "I just want peace in my own home." When Dr. Martinez would try to explore deeper issues, Robert would shut down. I don't think wanting to parent my own children makes me a bad person. Completely missing the point that his version of parenting was the problem. The breaking point came when Derek was 17. He'd been accepted to this amazing summer program for social justice advocacy. Cost $3,000, but it was exactly what he needed. I used money from Robert's shop improvement fund to pay for it. When he found out, he completely lost it. "You spent my money without asking me." Said this right in front of Derek and Joel. I had to explain in front of our children that marriage meant shared resources, that his attitude about his money was exactly the old kind of patriarchal thinking we were trying to overcome. But he kept yelling about how he'd been saving for equipment he needed, how he'd already promised his partner Mike they could expand. Derek ended up not going to the program because he felt guilty. Said he didn't want to be the reason his parents were fighting. This beautiful, conscious young man sacrificing his growth because his father couldn't see past his own selfishness. By the time Joel was 15, Robert had basically checked out, would come home, eat dinner in silence, disappear to the garage. Boys would follow him out there, and I'd hear them laughing about something, probably undoing all the progress we'd made during the day. When I'd try to address this with Robert, he'd say things like, "I'm tired, Sarah. I'm tired of everything being wrong. I'm tired of being wrong." This passive-aggressive way of making me the villain for trying to grow our family. The divorce came when I finally realized he was never going to change. I'd spent 18 years trying to help him become the partner and father our children deserved. But he was too set in his ways, too comfortable with traditional dynamics. Thought the boys would understand once they got older. Thought they'd appreciate what I was trying to do. Thought they'd see how much better off they were without his influence holding them back. But something went wrong. Peter calls me maybe twice a year now. Derek hasn't spoken to me since my birthday last year. Joel blocked my number completely about 6 months ago. Tried reaching out through email, social media, nothing works. Finally cornered Peter at his apartment building last month. That conversation, I keep thinking about it. "Peter, sweetheart, I don't understand what's happening with our family." He looked at me like I was a stranger. "Mom, do you really not get it?" "Get what? I dedicated my life to raising you boys right." "That's the problem. You dedicated your life to making sure we hated our father. Spent 2 hours in that parking lot while he told me things I couldn't believe. Said he remembered every dinner where I'd lecture us about how Dad represented everything wrong with men. Said I made them feel ashamed for wanting to be like their father. Said they watched me destroy him piece by piece. Peter, your father needed to grow. He was stuck in patterns that would have limited all of you. Mom, he was the kindest person we knew. He worked every day to provide for us, and you made him feel like garbage for it. He was holding you back from developing critical consciousness about gender and power. He was teaching us how to change oil and how to treat people with respect. You taught us that wasn't enough. Tried to explain about the bigger picture, about systems of oppression, but Peter got angry in a way I'd never seen. You want to know what I remember most? Coming downstairs Christmas morning when I was 9. Dad had stayed up all night building Joel's bike. His eyes were red, he was exhausted, but he was so excited to see Joel's face. And you said right there in front of us, "I wish you put this much effort into examining your privilege." Dad's face just fell on Christmas morning because you couldn't let him have one moment. That wasn't how I remembered it at all. I was trying to use a teachable moment about consumerism and gender expectations around gift giving, but Peter made it sound like I'd been cruel. Every family dinner you turned into a classroom where Dad was the example of what not to be. Every time he tried to connect with us, you'd redirect it into some lesson about toxic masculinity. We couldn't just be kids with a dad who loved us. Everything had to be filtered through your ideology. Told Peter he was misremembering, that his father's influence was making him see things wrong. That's when he really lost it. My father's influence? Mom, you want to know what Dad's influence was? He never said a bad word about you. Not once. Not even after the divorce. We'd ask him why you treated him like that, and he'd say, "Your mother loves you boys. That's what matters." Even when you'd humiliate him in public, even when you'd laugh at his ideas, even when you'd spend his money without asking. He protected you to us for years. We figured out who you really were on our own. This was completely unfair. I never humiliated Robert in public. I simply refused to pretend his opinions were automatically valid because he was a man. If he felt humiliated by being questioned, that was his own fragility. But Peter wasn't done. You want to know the moment I knew we were done? I was 22, remember? I brought my girlfriend over for dinner. Sarah, remember her? Sweet girl, studying to be a teacher. She mentioned she was excited about potentially staying home with kids someday. And you spent the entire evening explaining to her why that choice was problematic, why she was internalizing oppressive structures. This girl I cared about, sitting at our table, being lectured about her own dreams. I did remember that evening, felt it was important to help a young woman think critically about societal expectations, but the way Peter described it made it sound like I'd been attacking her. She cried in the car afterward, Mom, said she felt stupid and backwards. Never came to another family dinner. We broke up 6 months later. Not because of you directly, but because I started seeing my family through her eyes. Started realizing that Dad walking on eggshells wasn't normal. That you turning every conversation into a political statement wasn't normal. That a grown man having to ask permission to buy tools for his own business wasn't normal. Tried to explain that I never controlled Robert's purchases, just wanted to be consulted about major financial decisions, but Peter cut me off. Mom, you made him ask permission to spend $40 on new work boots. Because you'd already allocated that money for Derek's activism books. Books Derek never read, by the way, because you'd made learning feel like punishment. Dad worked in steel-toed boots with holes in them for 3 months because of that. This was getting distorted. I'd simply prioritized educational materials over Robert's impulsive shopping. The boots could have waited, the books were time-sensitive for Derek's development. But Peter was crying now, actually crying. You broke him, Mom. We watched you break our father over 18 years. Every time he tried to be excited about something, you'd explain why it was problematic. Every time he tried to share his interest with us, you'd redirect it to your agenda. Remember when he wanted to take us fishing? You made it into a lecture about masculinity and violence toward nature. Remember when he suggested we build a tree house? You said it reinforced hierarchical thinking and property ownership. Those weren't attacks. Those were opportunities to help the boys think deeper about activities they were accepting without question. Fishing did normalize a violent relationship with nature. Treehouses did teach children to claim dominion over environments. But apparently, Peter saw it differently. He stopped suggesting things after a while, just stopped trying. Would come home, do whatever housework you'd assigned him, eat dinner quietly while you lectured us. Then disappear to the garage because that was the only place in his own house where he wasn't being corrected. Peter, your father was resistant to growth. I was trying to help him become his best self. His best self, Mom, his best self was who he was before you decided he was broken. He was curious, optimistic, funny. He'd tell us stories about his customers, teach us card games, sing badly in the car. You turned him into someone who apologized for existing. We stood there for almost an hour while Peter told me story after story, each one more upsetting than the last. By his version of events, I'd spent years systematically tearing down a good man. But that wasn't what I was doing. I was trying to raise conscious children and help Robert overcome his conditioning. The conversation with Derek 2 weeks later was even worse. Tracked him down at his gym, waited until he was done with his workout. He was less emotional than Peter, but somehow more cutting. "Derek, baby, I need you to help me understand what's happening with our family." He looked exhausted before I even finished the sentence. "Mom, what do you want me to say?" "I want you to explain why you boys have shut me out. I gave everything to raise you right." Raised us right? Or raised us to hate ourselves? Spent 20 minutes trying to explain my parenting philosophy. How important it was to interrupt harmful socialization early. How I'd sacrificed to give them critical thinking tools their peers didn't have. Critical thinking tools? "Mom, you taught us that everything Dad loved was stupid. That wanting to work with our hands made us lesser. That being excited about sports meant we were buying into toxic competition. That asking a girl on a date meant we were participating in oppressive gender roles." None of that was true. I'd simply wanted them to examine these things thoughtfully instead of accepting them blindly. "Derek, I taught you to question, not to hate. You taught us to question everything except you. Every opinion that wasn't yours was internalized oppression or patriarchal conditioning. Dad couldn't have a preference for action movies without it becoming a discussion about violence culture. Joel couldn't want to play football without a lecture about masculine aggression. I couldn't be excited about getting my first job without hearing about how wage labor exploited the working class." Derek was getting agitated now, his voice rising. "You made everything political, Mom. Everything." Christmas was about capitalism and gender roles. Our birthdays were about consumerism and individualism. Going to the zoo was about animal exploitation. Dad suggesting pizza night was about processed foods and class privilege. These weren't attacks on family activities. These were opportunities to live more consciously, to make choices aligned with our values. But Derek wasn't done. "You want to know what I remember most? I was maybe 10 years old. Dad had saved up money to take us to this baseball game. He was so excited, had been planning it for weeks. Got us jerseys, bought peanuts and Cracker Jacks, the whole thing. And the entire drive there, you explained why baseball represented everything wrong with American masculinity. Talked about how sports distracted the working class from real issues. How competitive culture taught boys that winning mattered more than relationships. By the time we got to the stadium, Dad wasn't talking anymore. We sat through 9 innings in silence while he tried to pretend he wasn't miserable. I remembered that day differently. Had been trying to help the boys enjoy the game while understanding its cultural context. Wanted them to appreciate their father's gesture while thinking critically about what they were consuming. "Derek, I was trying to help you develop analytical skills. You were ruining everything Dad tried to do with us. Every time he planned something fun, you'd find a way to make it into a lesson about oppression. Every time he got excited about sharing something with us, you'd explain why it was harmful. He stopped planning things after a while, just let you take over all the family decisions. This was so frustrating. Robert stopped planning things because he wasn't good at considering the broader implications. I took over family decisions because I was better at thinking through complex factors. But Derek made it sound like I'd been controlling. Mom, do you remember when Dad wanted to teach us to change oil? Of course I remembered. Had explained that car maintenance was important life skill regardless of gender, but that we needed to discuss why automotive culture was typically masculine coded. You turned a father wanting to teach his son something useful into a 2-hour discussion about gender performance. Dad finally just said forget it and walked away. Never offered to teach us anything again. Now, I'm 26 years old, and I don't know how to change my own oil because you couldn't let him share his knowledge without deconstructing it. This wasn't my fault. Robert could have taught them car maintenance at any time. He chose to withdraw rather than engage with important questions about gender and skill sharing. Told Derek he was misplacing blame, that his father was responsible for his own choices. That's when Derek got really angry. responsible for his own choices. Mom, you made it clear that all his choices were wrong. Every hobby was problematic, every interest was toxic, every opinion was ignorant. You didn't marry Dad to change him. You married him to destroy who he was and rebuild him. And when he wouldn't let you, you made his life miserable until he left. Completely unfair characterization. I'd married Robert because I loved him and saw his potential. Wanted to help him grow beyond the limitations society had placed on him. Derek, your father was stuck in patterns that would have limited all of you. What patterns? Working hard, loving his family, wanting to share his interests with his sons. Those aren't limitations, Mom. Those are gifts. Gifts you taught us to reject because they came from someone you'd decided was broken. We argued for another 30 minutes, Derek telling me story after story that painted me as some kind of villain, him claiming I'd humiliated Robert in front of his friends, when I'd simply pointed out problematic assumptions in their conversations, claiming I'd isolated Robert from his family, when I'd just questioned why we needed to spend every holiday with people who reinforced traditional gender roles, claiming I'd controlled our finances, when I'd been trying to make responsible long-term decisions about our family's future. The conversation with Joel last week was the worst of all. Finally got him to agree to meet me for coffee. Thought maybe the youngest would be more understanding, less influenced by his brothers. Joel, sweetie, I've missed you so much. He barely looked at me. What do you want, Mom? I want to understand what happened to our relationship. We used to be so close. We were never close. You just thought we were because I stopped arguing with you. This hit me like a physical blow. Joel and I had spent hours together when he was younger, reading together, discussing important topics, working through his thoughts and feelings. Joel, those conversations we had about social justice, about equality, those meant everything to Shaw. Those weren't conversations, Mom. Those were lectures. I was 8 years old and you were explaining patriarchy to me. I was trying to help you understand the world. You were trying to make me hate my own father. Sat there while my youngest son told me how I'd poisoned him against Robert, how I'd made him feel ashamed of natural impulses and interests, how I'd turned every interaction with his father into a source of guilt. Remember when Dad taught me to ride a bike? Of course I remembered. Beautiful father-son moment that I'd used to discuss gender expectations around risk-taking and physical competence. I fell off and scraped my knee. Dad picked me up, cleaned the cut, told me I was brave. And you said, Joel, notice how Daddy expects you not to cry because you're a boy. That's how the patriarchy teaches men to disconnect from their emotions. I was 7 years old with a bleeding knee and you made it about your politics. This was so unfair. I'd been trying to help Joel process that experience without internalizing harmful messages about emotional expression. But Joel wasn't done. Dad just looked at you like you'd slapped him. Here he was, trying to comfort his hurt child, and you made him the enemy, made both of us feel like there was something wrong with the moment we were sharing. Joel, I was trying to help you develop emotional intelligence. No, you were trying to prove Dad was toxic. And you did it constantly. Every hug, every conversation, every moment of connection between us. You'd find a way to explain why it was problematic. We sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours while Joel systematically destroyed every memory I had of trying to be a good mother. According to him, I hadn't been protecting the boys from harmful socialization. I'd been preventing them from having a relationship with their father. The worst part wasn't even what you did to Dad, though that was horrible. The worst part was watching you teach us to see love as oppression. Dad working long hours wasn't sacrifice, it was absence. Dad wanting to share his interests wasn't generosity, it was imposing masculinity. Dad being affectionate wasn't love, it was patriarchal conditioning. You took everything good about having a father and made it suspect. Tried to explain that I'd been trying to help them have a more conscious relationship with gender roles. That uncritical acceptance of traditional fatherhood could limit their emotional development. Joel, I wanted you boys to have access to a full range of human experience, not just traditional masculine roles. Mom, Dad cried at movies. He hugged us constantly. He talked about his feelings. He was emotionally available in every way you said men couldn't be. But you couldn't see it because you decided he was the enemy. This wasn't true. Robert did struggle with emotional expression, often retreated to the garage instead of working through conflicts, would shut down during important conversations about household dynamics. Joel, your father avoided difficult conversations about growth and change, because every conversation became about what was wrong with him. Because you never wanted to grow together, you wanted him to disappear and be replaced by someone else. Someone who agreed with you about everything. Someone who had no opinions or interests that challenged yours. Joel was crying now, but trying to hide it. Dad loved you, Mom. Even after everything, he still talks about you with respect. Says you're a good person who got lost in ideas. But we lived it. We watched you destroy someone who loved you. Watched you take a kind, generous man and turn him into someone who apologized for breathing. The conversation ended with Joel telling me he needed space to process our relationship, that he might be willing to try again someday, but not now, that seeing me was too painful because it reminded him of watching Robert suffer, be involved. Thinking about these conversations for weeks now, trying to understand where everything went wrong. I gave everything to raise those boys consciously, sacrificed my own needs to help them develop critical thinking about gender and power, dedicated my life to interrupting harmful socialization before it could take root. But somehow they see me as the villain. They remember every time I questioned Robert's choices as an attack, every time I redirected a conversation toward important topics as a lecture, every time I made a financial decision as control. They remember their father as kind and loving, remember me as critical and demanding. Maybe I was too direct sometimes. Maybe I could have been gentler in how I presented important concepts, but I was trying to prepare them for a world that would try to shape them into oppressors. Now I'm sitting here alone while my 3 sons visit their father every weekend, while they call him multiple times a week, while they remember him with love, and me with resentment. Robert has a girlfriend now, someone simple who probably never challenges him to grow. The boys love her, say she's good for Dad, probably because she lets him stay comfortable in his old patterns. Keep thinking about what Peter said about actions and consequences, about how my ideology didn't prepare me for this. But that's not fair. My principles were sound. My goals were pure. I wanted my sons to be conscious men who understood systems of oppression. Instead, they've rejected everything I tried to teach them, chosen their father's simple worldview over the complex understanding I offered, chosen comfort over consciousness. Maybe someday they'll understand what I was trying to do. Maybe they'll appreciate the foundation I tried to build. Maybe they'll forgive me for being imperfect in my methods. But right now, I'm alone, and I don't understand how trying to raise conscious children and help my husband grow ended with everyone I love turning against me, sitting here wondering if there was another way, wondering if I could have been less direct, more patient, wondering if my sons will ever see that everything I did came from love, wondering why love wasn't enough.